Hello and welcome back to Biology with Mrs. Evans. In today's video we are going to be looking at the process photosynthesis. So photosynthesis, you heard me talk about that in Unit 4 that we just finished up on the cells and the organelles and their functions that they carry out. Photosynthesis, again, is the process that converts light energy into chemical energy. So the cells are going to use solar energy, and they're going to use that to make chemical energy, which is, as you know, glucose. And you should already remember the chemical equation for photosynthesis. Remember, it's 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of H2O in the presence of light is going to make glucose, which again, remember, is C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of oxygen. So what organisms do photosynthesis? Again, photosynthesis is carried out by autotrophs. Any organism that has a chloroplast is going to carry out photosynthesis. Traditionally, we think of plants, but there are some types of bacteria that are going to have a chloroplast and be able to carry out photosynthesis. Remember, we talked about endosymbiotic theory, and the oldest life form is the cyanobacteria. It is called cyanobacteria because it's blue-green, and it's blue-green because it contains chloroplasts. So autotrophs have the ability to do photosynthesis, and remember, photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. So in Unit 4, when I talked about the chloroplast, I said that the chloroplast contains these disc-like structures called thylakoids, and the thylakoids, remember I said, act as a solar panel. They're going to basically harness the solar energy, and they're going to use that solar energy to split apart a water molecule in order to make glucose. And you should remember the chemical equation for photosynthesis. So again, I'm going to write it here. It is 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O yields, alright, and again this is in the presence of light, yields glucose, which is C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of oxygen. So you see it here on the diagram down here. You have carbon dioxide and oxygen going in, and again it's in the presence of light, so the thylakoids are going to harness the light energy and use that energy to create glucose, and glucose is coming out, and then oxygen gas basically is a byproduct, so it's going to make 6 molecules of oxygen gas. So here's the chemical equation again. C6 H12O6, again, remember, is glucose. So this is the process of how glucose is being created in the presence of light. So you have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of H2O in the presence of light. So remember I said you can write the chemical equation one of two ways. You can see it written as plus light energy here, or you can have light energy, as you saw in the slide before that, where light energy is written above the arrow, and that means in the presence of, because it's not something that you are physically adding. It's not really a reactant. It's just something that's needed in order for the reaction to occur. So again, remember, reactants are always to the left of the arrow, and then the products are to the right of the arrow. And it looks like my chemical equation got cut off. This should be C6H12O6 plus 6 molecules of oxygen. This should be over here. So it looks like it got altered in the transfer to the software that I'm using. So glucose here plus 6 molecules of oxygen. So this should be over here. Okay, products. So photosynthesis, it takes place, we know, in the chloroplast. So I talked about thylakoids being those disc-like structures. Inside the thylakoid are what we call pigments. Pigments are light-absorbing molecules that are going to collect, they're going to harness the energy from the sun. So when we talk about light from the sun, we usually talk about it as being white light, because to us, that's what it appears. But you learned in earth science that light is not basically white as we see it. It basically has different wavelengths associated with it, because light travels in wavelengths, and we know that light has different wavelengths because if you look at light through a prism, or after it rains, you get to see the rainbow of colors. Remember Roy G. Bibb, red indigo, all of those colors that make up the rainbow. So chlorophyll is the primary light absorbing pigment in the chloroplast, but during the fall months you get to see the secondary pigments, or the accessory pigments we refer to them as, and those are your xanthophyll, carotenoids. Those are the other colors that you see in fall. So when chlorophyll starts to break down, then you start to see those secondary colors, and that's why we have the leaves change colors, because you're starting to see those secondary pigments that are in the leaves that are basically masked by chlorophyll, because that is the primary absorbing pigment in the plant. So what you need to know, pigments, they are light absorbing molecules. They're going to harness the energy coming from the sun, and they're going to use that energy to, like I said in previous slide, to break or split apart a water molecule, and you're going to see how that works. So because the chlorophyll and xanthophyll have a specific wavelength that they basically absorb, so when you look at plants underneath a microscope, they appear green, and that's because they do a really good job with absorbing wavelengths, light in the blue, violet wavelengths, and also in the red and orange, but they do not do such a good job with absorbing light in the green wavelength, and they actually reflect that back. So that's technically what we're seeing, is because they're not absorbing that wavelength, they're reflecting it back, so they appear green. So again, photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. It contains those thylakoids, those disc-like structures. And remember, I said if they are in basically a stack, and we refer to that stack as a grana for plural, and then granum for singular. And then stroma, remember I talked about that when we talked about chloroplast in the last unit. Stroma is the liquid portion of the chloroplast that surrounds the thylakoid membrane. So now we're going to look at each part and what role it plays in photosynthesis. So here is a better picture representation than what I drew for you guys on the board. Of what a chloroplast looks like. So remember, I said a chloroplast is a double membrane bound organelle. You see here it has an outer membrane, also has an inner membrane, and then the stroma again is the liquid portion that is filling this space around the thylakoids. And the thylakoids, remember, are each of these discs individually, and then the stack is, remember, called a granum, and the lumen is basically the fluid portion of the inside of the thylakoid. So photosynthesis basically consists of two steps. The first step is referred to as photolysis, and that's because light is going to be used to split apart a water molecule. It is also referred to as the light-dependent reaction because it requires light in order to take place. And then the second part, or the second step of photosynthesis, is referred to the Calvin cycle, and it's called the Calvin cycle after the gentleman that basically figured out what was going on. And it's also referred to as the light-independent reaction because light is not necessary for the last stage of photosynthesis. So the light-dependent reaction, these are going, this is what's going to happen in the thylakoid. So the thylakoid, again, acts as a solar panel. It's going to harvest basically the light energy coming from the sun, and it's going to use that energy to split apart a water molecule. That's why it's called photolysis. So it's going to convert light energy into chemical energy. It's going to use it to make basically ADP and NADPH, which is also another energy molecule. So when it splits apart the water molecule, it is going to add basically that hydrogen to the NADP plus to form NADPH, which again is another energy molecule used by the sun. I mean, not by the sun, by the cell. And remember, H2O is going to be split, so that H is going to go on the NADPH here, and then the oxygen gas is a byproduct, so it's going to be released because the cell doesn't need it. So the Calvin Calvin cycle is the second step. So this takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast. Again, it's the liquid portion. It is like the cytoplasm that you see in the cell, and it's going to use the energy molecules made in the light reactions to build high energy compounds. So it's going to take the carbon dioxide that's coming into the chloroplast, and it's going to use that as the backbone to form glucose, the C6H12O6. It is a relatively complicated process. When you get into AP Bio or you take it into college, you'll go into more detail, but those are the specifics of what you need to know. So the light-dependent reactions, or also referred to as the photolysis, is going to take place in the thylakoids, and that's because light is needed in order to split apart a water molecule, and the water molecule is going to be used, like I said, the hydrogen is going to be removed from the water molecule, and that's going to be attached to NADP plus to form the NADPH, which is another energy molecule used by the cell. And then the oxygen gas is a byproduct, so it's going to be given off. And then the Calvin cycle, also referred to as the light independent reaction, doesn't require light, is going to take the products from the light dependent reaction and use that as a backbone to make glucose. And the way that I remember the Calvin cycle is that when you are in the dark, you cannot see. So C, Calvin cycle, light independent reaction. It doesn't need light, so you're in the dark. And then factors that affect photosynthesis. We know that photosynthesis requires water and carbon dioxide. So those are two factors that impact photosynthesis. If you don't have enough water, you're not going to be able to do the photosynthesis because, as I just mentioned, photosynthesis is going to basically split apart a water molecule and use that hydrogen to create NADPH. So without water or enough water, you're not going to be able to carry out photosynthesis. And then temperature also plays a big role. So I talked about enzymes and how activity increases up until the optimal range. That's kind of like how photosynthesis works as well. If the temperature is too high, then there's not going to be enough water because remember, plants do not have sweat glands, nor do they have a tongue. When we talked about homeostasis, we said that dogs, will pant, and that plants do not have either one of those. So what they do, remember, is transpiration, which is the loss of water from plant leaves. So when the temperature gets too high, the plants are going to basically open up their stomata, allow for the loss of water to cool the plant. And because they're losing so much water, they don't have enough water to do photosynthesis. The same is when temperatures get too low. It is difficult to do photosynthesis. So in very extreme temperatures, photosynthesis will even stop because there's not enough water to carry on photosynthesis. And then carbon dioxide, again, you need carbon dioxide in order to form the backbone to glucose. So if you don't have enough carbon dioxide, you can't do photosynthesis either. And then the last factor that affects photosynthesis is the intensity of light. So just like when we talked about concentration for enzymes, how it increases up until the saturation point, that's exactly how it works for photosynthesis. Photosynthesis will increase up until it achieves basically that saturation point where it reaches its maximum rate, and at that point photosynthesis will level off, and you won't get any more byproduct, or not byproducts, but any more activity out of the cell because it's reached its maximum capacity. So make sure you know that photosynthesis obviously requires light, also requires carbon dioxide and water, and it also has a specific temperature range as to when it does photosynthesis. So right now we're getting ready to go into fall, so this is another aspect of maintaining homeostasis and things like that. So plants and that do photosynthesis, like trees, they have the ability to sense when the day length is not long enough for them to get the needed amount of sunlight to do photosynthesis. And they also have the ability to track when the temperatures are getting outside their optimal range, and that's when trees and things like that start to lose their leaves. They're not going to spend the energy to maintain leaves and things like that when they're not getting a very good cost benefit. So if it requires too much energy to maintain those leaves when they're not going to be able to function in the winter months, they go ahead and shed them. So they're basically conserving energy. And when they shed those leaves, then they're going to tap into their energy reserves, which they've stored basically in the trunk of the tree. The last thing that I want to talk about is tropism. Tropisms are basically a response to a stimuli. And plants, they are at a disadvantage because as a heterotroph, we are able to eat in order to get the things that we need. We also have the ability to move to go and get those. So if we get thirsty, we just go to our refrigerator and get a drink. If we get hungry, again, we can go to the refrigerator and grab those. But plants don't have that ability to move. They are basically stuck in one place, but they do have the ability to respond to a stimuli. So you've seen it with sunflowers, how they will turn and grow towards the light. That type of tropism is called phototropism, so they're growing towards the light because we know that sunlight is needed to do photosynthesis, so they're going to grow towards it to maximize basically the amount of sunlight that they can get. And then they have what we call gravity tropism, and gravity tropism is basically the response to gravity. The roots grow down because they're responding to the basically the force of gravity, and then the stems are going to grow upwards again because they're responding to the force of gravity. They know to grow upwards, whereas roots know to grow downwards because of the pull. And then the last one is thigmotropism, and you see them spelled here for you down here at the bottom. Thigmotropism is the response to touch. There is a plant that is called the tickle me plant that if you touch it, it will basically close its leaves. That's how a Venus flytrap is going to work as well. As soon as it senses the fly has landed, it will close in response to that touch. So tropism, you need to know response to a stimuli, and you need to know the three types. Phototropism, response to light. Gravity tropism, response to gravity. And thigmotropism is a response to touch. And this is a picture of a experiment that a student did. You can see that basically what they did was they varied where light was being shown through, and you can see that the plant was starting to grow in the direction of basically the light source coming from this area. So thigmotropism, response to touch. Phototropism, response to light. And this is what this is basically showing you, is that plants will grow towards the light in order to get the maximum effect of the light. And then gravity tropism is the response to gravity. So that's photosynthesis in a nutshell. Know that photosynthesis is takes place in the chloroplast, and the two steps are the photolysis or the light dependent reactions, and know that that takes place in the thylakoids. And basically what's happening is the cells or the chloroplast is harnessing the energy from the sun in order to split apart a water molecule, and that hydrogen that's coming off the water molecule is going to be added to NADP plus to form NADPH. It's also going to be used to generate some ATP. And then the light independent reaction, which is the second step in photosynthesis, also referred to as the Calvin cycle, are going to use the products coming out of the light dependent reaction to form glucose. So it's going to take the CO2 that's coming in and use that as a backbone to make a molecule of glucose. So that again is photosynthesis in a nutshell. Thanks for stopping by. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.